Hello there fellow acolytes of the Sega Saturn, and welcome to another Saturn Gems video. The series where we look at a variety of different games, from cheap games to expensive games, to hidden games, to well-known games, to imports, to local games. Hopefully there's something within this list that you'll find interesting. Without further ado, let's get cracking on the first game that we're going to cover in this video, and that's Croc, Legend of the Gobos. Croc is a 3D platformer game with quite interesting history. It started out as a Yoshi game that was going to be made for Nintendo. At least that was the intention by Argonaut, but it got turned down and they ended up making Super Mario 64 instead. Which, I'm not gonna lie, Super Mario 64 is the better game. But that's not to say that Croc isn't without its merits. Certainly in terms of the character design, you can see the influence of Yoshi within it, but the game still has its own very unique kind of style in terms of the world layouts to the enemy designs. You go around a variety of different stages. There are 5 different worlds, and within each world is a selection of different levels, platforming levels. You go through, collect the gems, collect the keys, and you work your way through, and eventually you will fight a boss. The bosses are interesting. Some of them are decent, and some of them can be a little bit annoying. The game does have an issue with combat being pretty terrible. When you're ground pounding stuff, it's not too bad, but whenever you're trying to, hit something in a swipe, it doesn't really connect that well. But it's still a pretty enjoyable platforming game. There are some parts that you might find a bit frustrating because the controls aren't the best. Croc uses the Resident Evil style tank controls, and that can make movement a little restrictive. But don't let that put you off. I mean, the game's not overly expensive. I think it goes for around £20. And the good thing is it comes in a nice plastic case as well for the PAL version. So, it's a worthy investment. The only gripe about the PAL version, and I will warn you about this, is that there is a bug. You have to load it up from the Sega Saturn boot screen, which is like the CD menu thing. Once you've got that, if you then put in the game and boot it up, it's fine. If you try and just load the game normally, then it has a lot of graphical issues, mainly with Croc. His figure is just completely fucked, basically, and it just looks really wonky. I actually once loaded it up like that and couldn't be bothered resetting, and I tried to play it as it, and it's pretty impossible. I mean, it's not a particularly difficult thing to sort out. You've just got to remember to do it. So if you're playing multiple short sessions, you may find it a little bit irritating to do. But that being said, it's still an enjoyable game, and if you like platformers, you'll be able to find some fun there. The next game on the list is D. D is made by the creator of Enemy Zero, which we covered in a previous episode, Kenji Eno. Kenji Eno does some quite interesting games. If you've ever played any of his titles, you'll know they're very unique in style. And D is no different. It's a point-and-click style adventure game where you wander around. Well, you go in and it's a hospital, but it turns into some kind of creepy castle-type place. And you wander around, you solve puzzles within rooms by going up and interacting to different items. The puzzles themselves aren't particularly difficult. The main difficulty lies in the fact that you only have 2 hours to beat the game. There's no pausing, no saving, you have to do it all in one playthrough. It sounds stressful, and it sort of is, until you realise that the game is very short, and even on your first playthrough, you can probably do it in about an hour. There's also like bonus ending where if you collect these 5 different beetle type things, you will get the secret ending. Now these locations are different every time, so you have to do a lot of searching around and trying to find them. Again, you can probably beat the game normally just within half the allocated time, so spending a bit of extra time to find these bugs isn't a massive deal. When I beat the game, I managed to find 4 of them just through normal play, and I missed one of them, which, I don't know, it's somewhere. So it's not that difficult to do, but it gives you a reason to play the game again. The story in itself is intriguing. I won't say much about it. It just starts off with you kind of going to investigate a mass murder that's happened at a hospital. Her father has basically gone mad and killed loads of people, and you're going in to try and see what's up with him, really. The story kind of twists, and it has an interesting twist at the end, which honestly is not completely unpredictable. It's something that once it happened, I thought, of course it is. The whole game's kind of obvious after you find out what it is. So if you're paying attention, you will probably guess the twist at the end. But, you know, it's pretty good. It's not a cheap game to get there. That is the main issue with it. I purchased mine in mint condition for, I think it was about £40–45, but I got a pretty good deal. If you're looking for the English version, you might be looking over 50 quid. Probably more in the future. I can see the price of this rising. The main issue, really, is the fact that in the PAL region, when you look online, you will find the German copy. The German copy is very, very common, and the English versions, not so much. You'll often find English versions either shabby in quality or with scratch CDs or whatever, and those generally seem to be the cheapest ones. If you're looking for a reasonable condition copy, I would grab it sooner rather than later. It's definitely a nice game to have to your collection, but just be wary of that. It is available on other platforms. I think you can get it on GOG, and it's going to be a hell of a lot cheaper. So if you're interested in playing it but don't want to spend a lot of money, that is another option. But I would say it's definitely an experience worth having. The next game on my list is actually the second part of a game that I covered in one of my earlier Gems videos, and that's Mobile Suit Gundam Side Story 2. It doesn't do a massive amount different to the first part. This feels like more the middle section of an extended game rather than the second part in a series. The Side Story series as a whole actually feels like one game split into 3 parts, which honestly some may find issue with, but the fact that these games are so cheap, it's not that big of a deal. Side Story 2 puts you in a different Gundam armour. It's actually the blue dude that you fight from the first game, and he works slightly differently to dude in the first game. It's not massively different, but it is a little different, and the controls in themselves kind of feel a bit smoother than in the first part. I don't know if it's because I'm more used to the controls after playing the first one, that I was more comfortable, but either way, it's something that when I played Side Story 2 I did find noticeable. It still kind of plays pretty much like the first one, but just a little bit smoother and a little bit tighter. As for the levels themselves, they're mostly kind of uninspired compared to the first one because there's not as much protection involved. In the first one you had a couple of protection missions, whereas in this one it's mainly just killing the Gundam armors, which is fine, it's good, it's enjoyable, but it hasn't got quite as much variety as in the first game. The one thing I will say about it though is that the game does seem to be a little bit more difficult. When you're taking down the armors, it's not as bad. You'll still probably find that you can do it with little issue. However, there is a big difficulty spike for the final boss. The final boss I had a big problem with. I got through all the levels without failing, apart from the final boss. I had to try him again and again, and he's pretty challenging. He's probably the hardest thing in the entire Side Story series, to be honest, from these 3 games. But, it's still pretty fun. It's still enjoyable. The games, as I mentioned before, are pretty cheap. You can probably pick up each part for a £5, and I would recommend picking up all 3. So this one, Side Story 2, which I'm covering in this video, I would still definitely recommend you pick up. Even if you're not a fan of Gundam games or mech games, I would still recommend picking it up and giving it a try. I don't like mech games, yet I do quite like these. The fourth game on my list has actually been the subject of some recent discussion over at the Saturn junkyard, and that's Sonic R. Sonic R is a little bit notorious. People consider it to be a shit game with terrible music, but it's not. Now, the music itself is basically Euro pop garbage. And I say that in the nicest possible way because it's cheesy as hell. But if you can appreciate the cheesiness, you'll probably love the music because the music is catchy. You will have that music in your head all day. It is brilliant. It's not traditional Sonic music, but that's not a problem because it's just so damn good and fun to listen to. The game itself is pretty good as well. It's a racing game, but most of the characters are actually on foot, so it works a little bit differently rather than being in a car. The controls can be a little bit loose. Turning in particular is a bit of an issue. For the most part, it won't cause you that much of an issue with the game because, quite honestly, it's still pretty enjoyable. There's one level which is a kind of a temple ruin type thing, and some parts of that can be tricky to navigate with the controls, but you know, I can still play through the game and still find a lot of enjoyment. It's completely unbalanced. In fact, once you unlock Super Sonic, it sort of ruins the game, because when you play Super Sonic, you will always win. If you don't play Super Sonic, then the computer will play Super Sonic and they will always win. It's very, very unbalanced. But it's enjoyable. The game itself's not amazingly expensive. You can pick it up for about 20 quid. You can probably pick up the Japanese version for a little bit less. It's also available on the Sonic Gems collection for the GameCube, which I think that goes for about 20 quid, and you get loads of other Sonic games too on it. It's definitely a game that you should probably try out. I mean, I'm not a massive racing game fan, but I find it enjoyable. It's short, sure, it's cheesy, it controls a little bit wonky, but it's good. I always have a lot of fun with it. The final game on the list is actually the middle entry of a trilogy on the Sega Saturn, and a trilogy that I've covered the first and third game of already, not necessarily in that order. And this game is Panzer Dragoon Zwei. Panzer Dragoon Zwei is the second part of the Panzer Dragoon series, but it's actually set before the first game. What's interesting about the game is that when you start, you're actually starting on a baby dragon. You're escaping from this town, and you're on a little dragon that doesn't even have the ability to fly yet. So it's plodding along on its little legs, going around, and you're doing pretty much the same thing as you would expect in a Panzer Dragoon game, just, you know, shooting everything that comes near. And as soon as you finish the level, it then evolves into a little young dragon. As the game progresses and you get more skill points, the dragon will evolve further. Depending on how many skill points you have and when you have them, you can evolve into different dragons. If you manage to gauge it just right, you can actually get the dragon model from the original Panzer Dragoon game, and that is arguably the best dragon in the game. If not the best dragon, it's certainly the coolest dragon. The evolution system is quite a nice little gimmick. The points that you get are based on how you perform in the level, and also based on the routes you take. This game actually has multiple routes, unlike the first game. You can choose whether to go in one direction or another. However, it's not a choice that you get a prompt for. You basically just have to be in the right place at the right time in order to go down that direction. It certainly has a lot of replayability, trying out all the different paths, not only to maximise your evolution, but to find your favourite path. You'll find that even though you may get more points from a certain path, you may get more enjoyment out of a different path. So it's certainly worth replaying and seeing everything the game has to offer. As for the game itself, I would say that the levels aren't as varied as the first game, and as such, I think there are less kind of monumental set pieces and less wow factor than in the first game. However, the game is a lot tighter, and you get the addition of a berserker mechanic. What will happen is you have a meter, a berserker meter, which will gradually build up. Once it's filled, you can unleash a berserk attack where the dragon just goes apeshit and annihilates everything on the screen. It's a joy to use every time. It's quite useful too on things like bosses or when you've got a screen full of enemies that you just want to take out. The bosses are also quite enjoyable. The final boss in particular is quite fun, at least in the first form. The second form can be a little bit annoying, but the first form is very enjoyable. And on top of that, you also unlock something called Pandora's Box. When you beat the game, you unlock Pandora's Box, and depending on how many hours you play, you gradually unlock more and more different options. You can change certain things, so you can change the style of the dragon, what level you start on, the difficulty, and many more different options. It's really good to have because you have like a certain, not only adjustable difficulty, because you have effectively an adjustable difficulty where you can cater the game depending on how you want to play. It's not like the other two games where when you play through it's effectively the difficulty it is, considering you have to play on hard to actually beat the first game. It's something where you can make it a lot easier if you're just wanting a quick playthrough of the story, or you can set it to something that would be more difficult if you're looking for a challenge. It certainly adds a lot of replay value, not only unlocking the different options, but actually using them too. If you have Panzer Dragoon Saga on your save file, you'll automatically unlock everything, which is also neat. Of course, that's something that was probably easier to do in the past, considering the price of Panzer Dragoon Saga now, but it can still be unlocked by normal means anyway, so you will be able to have access to all the options. It's definitely a fun game to play, and the game itself, even though it's rising in price, it's not too bad. You can probably pick it up for like 30-40 quid maybe, and it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. The main issue with the game is that it doesn't quite have the set pieces of the first one and doesn't have the intricacy of the third one, but that doesn't mean it's a bad game at all. It's still a fantastic title and definitely one of the best games on the system. And if you like the original Panzer Dragoon game, you're going to love this too. It's different enough so that it warrants having both games, but it's also very similar to the first game where, if you enjoy one, you'll definitely enjoy the second. So those were the 5 games that I covered. We had Croc, Legend of the Gobos, D, Mobile Suit Gundam Side Story 2, Sonic R, and Panzer Dragoon Zwei. Have you played any of these games? If so, what do you think? Do you think they're gems? Do you disagree? If you have any other games that you want to suggest for future episodes, then jot them down below. If I've got them, then I'll look to covering them sooner rather than later. If not, then maybe I'll pick them up and give them a shot. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.